On New Mexico Now, we will discuss the Trump administration's policy on immigration enforcement and the review of national monuments. Also, Education Secretary Hanna Skandera has resigned. These stories and more on New Mexico Now. Welcome to New Mexico Now. I'm Natl Moreno. Joining us in studio is Walt Rubel, editorial page editor with the Las Cruces Sun News. Lauren Villagran, formerly with the Albuquerque Journal, now with Searchlight New Mexico, is also here joining us. And in studio, we have Sylvia Ulloa with New Mexico in Depth. Thank you all for being here. Earlier this year, the Trump administration put forth new policies that aim for stricter immigration enforcement laws. Since then, immigrant advocates have participated in protests and rallies across the country, and New Mexico in Depth recently reported how recent enforcement actions impacted one local family. Jeff Torbada and his mother, Francia Elena Benitez Castaño, were detained by ICE within minutes of each other. Benitez Castaño was recently deported to Colombia. Taborda was released by immigration officials due to his eligibility for DACA, Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, which was implemented under the Obama administration. Now, Sylvia, I'd like to start with you because you were reporting on this. This story, how does it really show how deportation rules have changed?
Well, actually, it doesn't really change the rules. I guess it does change the rules of deportation, it doesn't change the laws. And really what was going on before was really just prosecutorial, or they call it prosecutorial discretion. And before they were really, under the Obama administration, they were really focusing their enforcement on criminals and like repeat violators of the law, and also people who had just arrived. They were really pretty much leaving in place people who had been here a long time, people that were just going about their business, going to work. And so what's really changed, and what one person, one of the advocates told me, was that like pretty much they're making everybody deportable. That's the difference, is that anybody who is here illegal is eligible for deportation.
So, when they are detained, was there a difference between how the court cases were handled? Is that what you're saying in some ways?
No, because once you're detained, they will go through the process. You'll get a review before an immigration judge, and mostly if you've gone against the immigration rules, you'll be deported. What was really different is that who they were targeting for removal. So, like I said, this family under the previous administration would not really have been targeted at all, because they'd been here 20 years. They had one of their sons is a U.S. citizen, and so what's different now is that they had orders of removal, and so they were kind of put up to the front of the line, even though they were upstanding citizens, went to work. The son just graduated from New Mexico State in December. So
the Department of Homeland Security basically put out new rules earlier this year in response to President Trump's executive order that broadened the definition of criminal. So both the Obama administration and the Trump administration targeted criminal people with some sort of criminal record. The difference is that definition is immensely broad under the Trump administration. So that could mean maybe you have a traffic ticket, or if you have crossed the border more than once, it means you have incurred a felony in your past. And so all of those people, which is essentially just about everyone who might be living here illegally if they've crossed in the last 15 years, are deportable, as Sylvia said.
Now, one of the things I'm a little curious about is, this is a family that's been here for quite a while. They have roots here. Could cases like this perhaps strike more fear within immigrant communities that in our region?
Certainly, and I think one of the challenges for the Border Patrol, as I read this story, we haven't got into the story of the father yet, who is now in sanctuary at a local church. He was able to escape, essentially. They made an attempt at deporting him as well, and he was able to make his way into a local church. And so in this case, my understanding is that the order was issued, I think, 14, 15 years ago. Mm-hmm. And so it's been standing this whole time. And so legally, there really isn't any recourse. They're enforcing something that they could have, and you can argue should have enforced 14 or 15 years ago. So the fact that they are now going after, and I don't know how another way to put it, going after those types of people who clearly have, not only do they not have a criminal record, but they are loyal churchgoers. They are the son has graduated from NMSU with an idea of going into law enforcement. So I mean, they're the exact opposite of the type of people, the bad hombres that the president says that we're trying to get rid of.
Back in February when ICE had its latest sort of enforcement operation, which didn't in the end round up that many people, but it struck a lot of fear into the hearts across the immigrant community in Las Cruces. You saw that when more than 2,000 children were absent from school in the week following that enforcement action. So while many of the kids who are here are U.S. citizens, a lot of people are terrified. They're terrified that they're going to go home, their parents won't be there, and I think parents are scared that they might get picked up while driving their child to school. So I think it is something that the community at large needs to be aware of, and ultimately when you look at why these deportation orders sat pat for 15 years, it had to do with the way different presidential administrations have applied the law while Congress has not changed immigration law, while people have continued to come over to fill jobs that Americans haven't filled. It's all a big cycle, and it's all connected.
I think that's right. We spoke to the Mexican consulate, and they one thing that they did say was that people are coming in and they're asking, like, how do I take care of my kids in case I get deported? And they said that they created like 4 seminars. They had to just keep adding seminars for people who wanted to get right with the immigration law. But the problem is that there's no really way to get right with the immigration law until there is comprehensive immigration reform.
All right, now I want to get on to the next topic. A new executive order this year calling for a review of national monuments designated from the start of 1996, that were at least 100,000 acres or more, has prompted local action and debate on the Organ Mountains Desert Peaks National Monument. Now, since this executive action took effect, there's been local governments in our area that have weighed in on the issue, and New Mexico's congressional delegation has spoken out as well. 2nd District Republican Congressman Steve Pierce has recommended to Interior Secretary Zinke that the monument be shrunk in size, while New Mexico's Democratic U.S. Senators Tom Udall and Martin Heinrich are urging the Secretary to leave the monument as it is. Now, this has been obviously a big issue building up to the establishment of the monument. How is it looking now? I mean, is the community, somewhat divided on this issue?
Well, this is going to be another one of those cases where the fact that we're taping on Tuesday is going to make a difference, because the county commission is hearing this case right now as we're taping this, and they've got competing proposals. Commissioner Rawson came forward and said, we want to support Interior Secretary Zinke in the review. And I think Billy Garrett said, well, no, we want to support, or we want to oppose the review. And so the people watching this on Thursday will know what the county decided on that there. But to me, the bigger question is any of this legal? I mean, is the Antiquities Act just another executive order that the next president can come along and say, no, we don't want to do that? I mean, it never has been interpreted that way in the past. And so I understand all the concern, and I think it's valid. But I kind of want to see what the court rules on this before we get too far down the line, because I'm sure those challenges have already been issued.
So you think this is going to be something that could end up in a court battle?
Yeah, absolutely.
And in the course of this review, Interior Secretary Zinke has said that he wants to see if communities support the monuments, he isn't going to, quote unquote, rip the Band-Aid off and change the size of the monument. Now, there has been, throughout this whole 10-year process of grassroots organization, a vocal contingent in Doña Ana County, especially of ranchers and Republicans, generally conservatives, who never wanted to see the monument as big as it is. So Congressman Pierce always supported the monument, but he supported it being very small, just contained to the actual Organ peaks. All of the other peaks included, he was not in favor of that. So he supported a monument, but a smaller footprint, and that's what he's asking Interior Secretary Zinke to basically reduce the monument size.
Now we've heard supporters of the monument that want to keep it as it is, saying that the monument has had an economic impact in the area. We've seen local coffee shops come up with different brands named after the Organ Mountains. We've had clothing brands established in the area. Is there any way that we could really know the exact economic impact that the monument is having in our area?
I felt like there was something just recently that said it had at least $5 million worth of economic impact.
Yeah, but I really think the answer is no. I mean, it's one of those things that somebody comes and they go tour the monument, and we don't have a real good accounting. And because it is not the traditional monument like White Sands, where you have a gate at the entry and everybody goes through one gate, we don't know how many people are up there traipsing around the Robledos, and we don't know if there are more people because of the monument. I really think that's a hard thing to gauge. And I also think that public support is a hard thing to gauge. I mean, I know the supporters say that they just put out a new poll that shows the majority of people support it, but it's anytime you commission your own poll I'm always skeptical of those, and I just think it's unfortunate that it was never put to a vote. And there never was congressional action on it. They tried to get Congress to act for years and years, and they never could do it. And so in the end, there was action taken by one person, the president, through the Antiquities Act. And that always, I think, that never has the kind of buy-in.
The thing is, it's also a bit premature to measure any of these things, because part of the point is when the monument was created, the Bureau of Land Management, which manages the land included in the monument, had 5 years to come up with a plan for how to manage the area. So really the only truly publicly accessible piece of the monument is the Dripping Springs area. That has an actual visitor center. They can count the number of visitors. You pay a fee to get in. Everywhere else is truly wilderness at this point. So like Walt said, you just don't know how many people are climbing up the top of the Uvas. They were supposed to have 5 years to look at it. So I'm not sure, despite the claims, we can really know, what kind of impact it's having on the community.
All right, well, we should see what happens with this topic as it unfolds here shortly. Earlier this month, New Mexico Education Secretary Hanna Skandera announced her resignation. It marks the end of Skandera's tenure as Education Secretary that was filled with a lot of controversy. American Federation of Teachers President Stephanie Lai weighed in on the action, saying it was welcoming news. She told the Associated Press that, quote, "We are ready to work together with the new secretary and are calling on Governor Martinez to name a replacement with deep and meaningful education experience," end quote. Now, New Mexico State Representative Alonso Baldonado, a Los Lunas Republican, and a member of the House Education Committee also told the AP that Skandera was never given the chance to enact her reforms. He says, quote, "The unions came with a closed mind and were unfair to her." So I'm a little curious, just starting off with the announcement of the resignation. Walt, were you surprised by this move?
Not really. I mean, the governor's coming up on the last of her second term. This will be the last year of her second term. And Hanna Skandera has had a fight from the very first day that she was named, because she's never been a classroom teacher. And so there has been resistance from the very beginning. And then on top of that, she brought in these reforms that I think were seen as coming from Florida, from Jeb Bush, this very top-down approach. And there was resistance from the legislature and from not just the teachers' unions, but just from teachers throughout the state, I think, felt disrespected and felt like this was somebody who's never done my job. So how can she accurately lead me, and how can she accurately change the evaluation system, which I think is what enrages them most. And what they don't understand, teachers who have been there doing their job for 20 or 30 years, all of a sudden get this evaluation system that tells them that they're not, performing up to, and they don't understand why. And there's just been a lot of resistance to everything that she's tried to do.
So I'm a little curious. I mean, as her tenure has ended, what do you think Skandera is going to be remembered for here in New Mexico?
I think she's going to be remembered for her park scores and for this incomprehensible grading of the schools. I mean, I think that was something that very few people understood. It was riddled with errors when they were first rolling it out, so people didn't trust the data, and they're like, how did I go from an A school to a C school in 1 year? And there's just a lot of resistance to that, and they felt like it was not meaningful. I think it's really interesting that she's leaving right at the same time that essentially her education system is being put on trial in in New Mexico because they're really looking at the funding and how inadequate it is. I think that she did have there were some victories that she could claim, and that was, graduation rates have gone up. We haven't really lifted ourselves from, I think we went from 49th to 50th in the nation, but part of that is just because other states are getting better. So there were some victories that she could claim. I think that some other things, she met resistance for a good reason.
Now, as we look at Skandera's tenure as well, how can we really, Walt, you mentioned a top-down approach to this. I mean, does that really say something about her relationship with school districts around the state?
Absolutely, and to me, she got off to such a bad start with the Las Cruces district. The very first thing she did after she got in office was essentially accuse our district and specifically Stan Round of stealing money, of fudging the numbers on special education money, and stealing money that didn't rightfully go. And she did this. She made the accusation before she did the audit. Once the audit came back, she had to backtrack and say, okay, there wasn't wrongdoing here. And I think throughout her tenure, she just was very confrontational, and there was never a sense of cooperation that we're all pulling together. I mean, every reform that she put through, it seemed like it was a fight. It was never working with anybody.
I think that what Sylvia mentioned, this lawsuit may help define her legacy going forward. There is a 9-week lawsuit in Santa Fe in which the Center on Law and Poverty and the Mexican American Legal Defense Fund essentially accuses the state of negligence in education, basically saying the state is not properly educating our kids. And the state has gone to court and argued essentially that some of our kids can't learn. And I think that what happens in the outcome of that lawsuit is going to be defining not only for Skandera's legacy, but also for how the state moves forward on educating. An incredibly diverse population with a lot of challenges during a time of financial strife. So, when that trial comes to conclusion, I think we'll have more answers around how folks will view her legacy.
All right, well, I want to thank you all for joining us. Sylvia Loa with New Mexico in Depth, thank you for being here, and Walt Rubel with the Las Cruces Sun News. Lauren, you're going to stick around to tell us about a reporting project that you've been working on. We'll be right back. We now have a discussion about water in our region. Remaining in studio with us is Lauren Villagrán, formerly with the Albuquerque Journal, now with Searchlight New Mexico, to share a little bit more about a special reporting project she has been a part of titled Nations One Aquifer, a series about water and the border. Lauren, thanks for joining us. Many folks know that the U.S. and Mexico have a treaty with the Rio Grande, but they may not know that when it comes to groundwater, there is no treaty, correct?
That is correct. So the 1906 treaty between the U.S. and Mexico literally governs every drop of water in the Rio Grande, how much New Mexico gets, how much Texas gets, and how much Mexico gets. On the other hand, basically groundwater, so aquifer water, is not covered by that treaty, and there is no international agreement. So where aquifers stretch beneath the border, whoever sticks a straw in deepest and pulls the water out the fastest gets it.
Now let's get into what really drew you to this project.
Well, as you know, I've covered the border for the last 4 years in southern New Mexico, and most of the time that I'm out there, I work with a photographer named Roberto Rosales of the Journal, and he has been basically on the border for the last 10 or 15 years. And 8 or 9 years ago, he saw an enormous pipeline go in the desert south of Santa Teresa on the San Jeronimo side in Mexico. And every time we'd travel out to the border, we'd say, what is that pipeline? What are they doing? So it really was sparked by curiosity. And what we discovered in reporting this project is that essentially Ciudad Juarez, many years ago, as their aquifer that they share with El Paso started to turn saltier, and they started to have problems, they looked west for water, and they began to tap the aquifer that New Mexico depends on. It stretches beneath the border, and there's really nothing to stop them.
Now, what are experts saying about, what's happening now with the groundwater?
Okay, so let me first sort of put the Ciudad Juarez project in perspective. They are using less water from this aquifer. It's called the Mesilla Bolson on our side, and it's called Conejos Médanos on the south side of the border. It's the same aquifer, though. It's the same body of water that stretches from south of the Foxconn electronics plant all the way up through the Mesilla Valley, all of the pecan orchards that you see, the city of Las Cruces. We all depend on this Mesilla Bolson aquifer. When Ciudad Juarez built this pipeline, and in fact it was Mexican billionaire Carlos Slim's company, Grupo Carso, that built the pipeline under contract with the city. When they turned that pipeline on, they basically turned on demand the size of the city of Las Cruces. It was actually less water than they intended to take, but it was enough that immediately there was a reaction on our side of the border. Wells near the border in Santa Teresa have dropped 30 to 50 feet in some cases over the past 5 to 7 years. So there's a combination of things happening. The groundwater use on the Mexican side, and then the groundwater use on the US side, because at the same time, we're in a drought here. And so farmers and cities have depended on groundwater, whereas farmers would normally be depending on the river water.
Now, what are water experts saying? Is this something that should we be really alarmed about how quick the water is dropping here?
Well, I don't want to alarm anybody because historically the Bolson is recharged by the river. And this year we've had a better snowmelt, so there is more water running off into the river, and hopefully there will be more recharge. But it is alarming in the sense that the two sides aren't talking. So Mexico and the US, what informal talks there were in the late 90s and early 2000s basically broke down between the violence in Juarez, the recession here, a lack of funding, and because Texas and New Mexico are also fighting over groundwater usage.
Now, you bring up a good point. The United States and Mexico, they govern water differently. Is that correct?
Correct. So there are a number of barriers to why there isn't an international treaty in place. One of the big ones is that in Mexico, the federal government governs the water. The federal government in Mexico owns all of the water, and essentially cities, states, and private users license the water. In the US, every state has its own water rights system. Texas has a different system than New Mexico. In New Mexico, you have to prove up your rights. There's a consumptive use model. In Texas, if you are a landowner, you own the resources beneath the land that you own. And so that means that for Mexico to negotiate with the US, they wouldn't be negotiating just with the US government, but with all of the water rights holders across those states. So it's just never been viable.
Now, it sounds like a really complicated process. Was that process complicated even more with rhetoric about border security and possibly the building of a border wall?
Yes, so obviously any local political will that there might be to at least restart informal talks so that water managers on our side of the border could get a good sense of what Ciudad Juarez's plans are going forward for the aquifer, I think is inhibited by the rhetoric at the national level. So when you have President Donald Trump kind of continuing the drumbeat about a border wall, the Mexican government not happy about that, I don't think you're going to see both sides come to the table in any formal manner at this point.
Now, you mentioned earlier that the Rio is recharged through snowpack. What are water experts saying about that? I know that there was more snow this year, and people are excited about that. But is it different? Is it is climate change playing a role in perhaps what the Rio is getting from snowpack?
Well, those two magic words are up for debate, so it depends on who you ask. But when you talk to scientists at New Mexico Tech or New Mexico State, what they are watching is potentially a shift towards a more arid climate here permanently. And so the idea is that yes, wet years may come back, but they may not be as wet as they were before. And what's happening is that because the river is running fewer days of the year, all of us who live down here know that the bed of the Rio Grande is dry most of the year. So the river is not trickling down into the aquifer the way it may have 20 years ago. And so scientists are worried that that relationship is being divorced, and that could have long-term consequences, because it means that the groundwater pumping by pecan farmers, by municipalities, and by Ciudad Juarez, it could turn into a mining operation, meaning we're taking water out that isn't being put back in by nature. This is something that people are going to have to be looking at long term. What does our climate look like 5 years from now, 10 years from now?
Now, just looking in Doña County, a border county here in New Mexico, there's a lot of hope that trade could start booming and development can happen along the border in Santa Teresa. So, how is this going to affect that development and other agriculture in the area?
Well, so there is a bright spot. This bolson holds an immense amount of water. The issue is that the freshwater cap is limited, or has, with the drought, has been limited, but there is believed to be an immense brackish resource. So El Paso, right next door, already has the world's largest inland desalination plant, meaning they're taking their brackish water, desalinating it, and making it potable for their city. So theoretically, Santa Teresa, Sunland Park, and possibly even Juarez could get together to desalinate the brackish resource and fuel this future growth that I think a lot of New Mexicans are hoping for at the border. That is potentially an expensive process. New Mexico State University is looking at a research project down there. So this is not a doom and gloom situation, but it is something that's going to require resources, planning, and vision going forward.
Now, Lauren, this was also a grant-funded project. Is that right?
Correct. I and the Albuquerque Journal got a grant through the McGraw Center at the City University of New York Graduate School of Journalism, and they funded this project, which took months to put together. So we're really grateful for that support.
Well, thank you so much for joining us and sharing about the project.
Thank you.
Now, thank you to Lauren Villagran, formerly of the Albuquerque Journal, and also now with Searchlight New Mexico. We also want to thank our guests from earlier, Sylvia Ulloa with New Mexico in Depth, and Walt Rubel from the Las Cruces Sun News. You can like us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter at KRWG for the latest news and programming announcements. Remember, we would love to hear your stories and topics for this program as well. You can email us at feedback@nmsu.edu. Thanks for joining us. I'm Anthony Moreno.